The ancient philosophy of Stoicism, with its profound insights into human nature and the pursuit of a virtuous life, offers invaluable guidance on navigating the complexities of social interactions. While Stoicism emphasizes self-improvement and inner resilience, it also provides a practical framework for discerning and distancing ourselves from individuals whose behaviors are detrimental to our well-being. These are not simply people with minor flaws or occasional shortcomings, rather, they are individuals whose pervasive attitudes and actions actively undermine our peace, hinder our growth, and erode our capacity for happiness. Identifying and limiting exposure to such individuals is not an act of selfishness or judgment, but a necessary step in safeguarding our mental and emotional health, allowing us to cultivate the inner tranquility that is so central to the Stoic ideal. In this exploration, inspired by the wisdom of Stoic thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, we delve into 15 distinct personality types that Stoicism cautions us against associating with, detailing their characteristics, the potential harm they can inflict, and the Stoic principles that guide us in responding to their presence in our lives. It is essential to remember that Stoicism advocates for understanding and compassion, even towards those who exhibit negative traits. However, this compassion should not extend to allowing their negativity to poison our own lives. By recognizing these toxic patterns and developing strategies for managing our interactions with these individuals, we can cultivate a more virtuous, resilient, and fulfilling existence, aligned with the core tenets of Stoic philosophy. The ultimate goal is not to condemn or change others, but to protect our own inner peace and cultivate virtue in the face of challenging relationships. And remember that as you consider these points, it's vital to assess whether you might display any of these tendencies yourself. Self-awareness is a cornerstone of Stoic practice, and identifying our own shortcomings allows us to actively work towards self-improvement and become more virtuous individuals. Now, let's embark on this journey of self-discovery and social discernment, guided by the enduring wisdom of Stoicism. First, the Stoics warn us against the flatterer. This individual, often motivated by ulterior motives, lavishes us with insincere praise and compliments, not out of genuine admiration, but as a means to gain our favor and manipulate us for their own benefit. A sincere compliment, born from genuine appreciation, is a valuable form of connection and encouragement. However, the flatterer's accolades are excessive and unrealistic, designed to stroke our ego and lower our defenses. The Stoics advise us to be wary of such individuals, to see through their deceptive tactics and question their true intentions. Perhaps they seek a favor, aspire to gain power through association, or simply seek to inflate their own ego by winning our approval. Whatever their aim, their excessive praise is merely a tool for achieving their own selfish ends, devoid of genuine regard for our well-being. In practical terms, this means cultivating a healthy skepticism towards overly effusive praise. When someone consistently showers you with compliments that seem exaggerated or out of proportion, it's wise to pause and consider their motivations. Are they trying to sell you something? Do they need your support for a project? Are they simply trying to gain social currency by being seen as your friend? By remaining grounded and avoiding the temptation to bask in superficial praise, we can protect ourselves from being manipulated and maintain a more realistic assessment of our own strengths and weaknesses. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and inner validation, reminding us that true worth comes from within, not from the fleeting approval of others. This approach isn't about rejecting all compliments, but rather about discerning between genuine appreciation and manipulative flattery. By cultivating this discernment, we can protect ourselves from being exploited and maintain a more authentic sense of self-worth. Secondly, the Stoics caution us about the greedy. These individuals are consumed by an insatiable desire for material possessions, wealth, and status. Their avarice clouds their judgment, corrupts their character, and drives them to prioritize the accumulation of material wealth above all else. For the greedy, life is a relentless pursuit of more, an endless cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. They are never content with what they have, regardless of how much they possess. Their greed often leads them to exploit others, to scheme and manipulate in order to amass even greater wealth. They view life as a zero-sum game, believing that their gain necessarily comes at the expense of others. They are unwilling to share, to be generous, or to consider the needs of those less fortunate. Their greed stems from a deep-seated sense of insecurity, a fear of lack that drives them to accumulate more than they could ever possibly need. The Stoics recognized that true contentment comes not from external possessions, but from inner peace and virtue. They advise us to cultivate a sense of gratitude for what we have, to focus on things of true value, such as wisdom, character, and serenity. The greedy, in their relentless pursuit of wealth, sacrifice their integrity, their relationships, and their peace of mind. They are trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction, forever chasing an elusive sense of fulfillment that can never be found in material possessions. To avoid the trap of greed, Stoicism encourages us to practice voluntary simplicity. This doesn't necessarily mean renouncing all possessions, but rather consciously choosing to live with less, to prioritize experiences and relationships over material accumulation. By focusing on our inner values and cultivating a sense of gratitude for what we have, we can break free from the cycle of craving and find true contentment. It's also important to recognize that true wealth lies in our character and our relationships, not in our bank accounts. By investing in these areas, we can build a life that is rich in meaning and purpose, regardless of our financial circumstances. Third, the Stoics warn us to avoid and not emulate the envious. These are individuals who harbor resentment towards the talents, successes, or possessions of others. They are consumed by jealousy, constantly comparing themselves to those who they perceive as being more fortunate. The envious operate from a mindset of scarcity, believing that another person's success diminishes their own. They feel that life is a zero-sum game, and that any gain for someone else necessarily means a loss for them. This breeds resentment, insecurity, and animosity, leading them to act out in destructive ways. The envious may try to undermine those they envy, belittling their talents, dismissing their achievements as mere luck or privilege, or spreading malicious rumors. They seek to diminish the success of others, rather than finding inspiration in their accomplishments. Their jealousy often leads them to make snide remarks, deliver backhanded compliments, and secretly revel in the misfortunes of those they envy. The Stoics recognize envy as a form of involuntary moral weakness, stemming from a lack of wisdom. However, they emphasize that we have a choice in how we respond to these feelings. The wise course is to view others with goodwill, to celebrate their successes, and to be inspired by their talents to cultivate our own virtues. Instead of falling into the trap of envy, we can use the achievements of others as motivation to improve ourselves. This requires a shift in perspective, from viewing life as a competition to recognizing that everyone has their own unique path and potential. By focusing on our own growth and development, rather than comparing ourselves to others, we can overcome envy and cultivate a more positive and fulfilling outlook. It also involves practicing gratitude for what we have, rather than focusing on what we lack. By appreciating the blessings in our own lives, we can diminish the power of envy and cultivate a sense of contentment. Fourth, the Stoics caution us against the angry, also known as the chronically angry person. These individuals are prone to frequent rages, bitterness, and desires for revenge. Their temper overpowers their reason and judgment, leading them to act impulsively and destructively. The angry person is easily provoked by minor slights, real or imagined. They tend to view the actions and words of others in the worst possible light, and are quick to take offense. They carry grudges for long periods, refusing to forgive or let go of past hurts. The Stoics saw the roots of anger in thwarted desires and a sense of helplessness. The angry person feels that they are not getting what they deserve from the world, breeding resentment and the urge to lash out. Rage and retaliation become their way of asserting control. When gripped by anger, the angry person cannot think clearly or act constructively. Their temper clouds their faculties of reason, leading them to speak harshly and act impulsively, making the situation worse rather than better. The Stoics advise us not to emulate the angry. While anger may arise involuntarily, we choose whether to act upon it. The wise course is to pause for perspective when we feel provoked, to resist the urge to react impulsively, and to consider the consequences of our actions. Getting swept up in anger only poisons our own lives, damaging our relationships and undermining our inner peace. It is better to act from reason and self-control, not from petty grudges and resentment. To manage interactions with angry individuals, Stoicism emphasizes the importance of remaining calm and detached. Avoid engaging in arguments or escalating the situation. Instead, try to understand the source of their anger and respond with empathy, without necessarily condoning their behavior. It's also important to set boundaries and protect yourself from their outbursts. If their anger becomes abusive or harmful, it may be necessary to distance yourself from them for your own safety and well-being. Remember, you cannot control the anger of others, but you can control your own reactions. Fifth, the Stoics warn us about the complainer. The chronic complainer is a perpetually negative individual, constantly criticizing and moaning about their circumstances. They spread gloom rather than light, finding fault with almost everything. The complainer's attitude is that nothing is ever good enough. Rather than take constructive action to improve things, they simply whine and complain, playing the victim and acting powerless. The complainer craves others' sympathy and attention, broadcasting their grievances widely. This breeds negativity that drags down themselves and those around them. Complainers don't realize that their venting just reinforces their unhappiness, creating a toxic mindset. The Stoics teach us not to emulate the complainers. While we may face difficulties, we only make things worse for ourselves by excessive lamenting. It is far wiser to focus on making the best of what we can control, taking constructive action rather than wallowing in negativity. Hardships are inevitable, but we decide whether we meet them with wisdom and resilience or futile complaints. Interacting with complainers can be draining and demoralizing. To protect yourself from their negativity, Stoicism advises setting boundaries and limiting your exposure to their complaints. Avoid engaging in their negativity or trying to solve their problems for them. Instead, gently redirect the conversation to more positive topics or encourage them to take action to improve their situation. It's also important to remember that you cannot change the complainer's mindset. Their negativity is often deeply ingrained, and your attempts to cheer them up or offer solutions may be met with resistance. Focus on maintaining your own positive attitude and protecting your own mental well-being. Sixth, the Stoics caution us against emulating the self-pitying individual. These people wallow in their own misery and portray themselves as victims at every turn. The self-pitying person takes no responsibility for their circumstances, blaming other people, fate, or the universe for their troubles. Their attitude is, "Poor pitiful me, I deserve better than this unfair world." This breeds a mentality of powerlessness and resentment. The self-pitying individual expects others to coddle them and make things right, broadcasting tales of woe to elicit sympathy and reassurance. However, this constant self-absorption crowds out compassion for what others may be dealing with. The Stoics warn us against the mindset of self-pity. They advise taking a balanced view of life's ups and downs. When faced with adversity, we should focus on what we can control and build resilience, not portray ourselves as victims. Challenges are inevitable, but we decide whether we meet them with maturity or melodrama. Interacting with self-pitying individuals can be emotionally draining. Their constant need for reassurance and sympathy can become overwhelming, and their refusal to take responsibility for their lives can be frustrating. Stoicism advises setting boundaries with self-pitying individuals, avoiding getting drawn into their negativity and offering solutions that they are unlikely to accept. Encourage them to take responsibility for their lives and focus on what they can control. It's also important to remember that you cannot fix their problems for them. Ultimately, they need to find their own inner strength and resilience to overcome their self-pity. Your role is to offer support and encouragement, without enabling their victim mentality. Seventh, Stoicism cautions against the arrogant. The arrogant possess an inflated sense of self-importance and superiority over others. Their excessive pride blinds them to their flaws and actual standing. The arrogant person presumes they are always right, the best at what they do, and deserving of special treatment. They are convinced of their superior talents, intelligence, status, and entitlements. This leads them to talk down to others and view advice or criticism as beneath them. An arrogant attitude breeds intolerance, disrespect, and hostility towards those deemed lower. The arrogant individual is unable to recognize their mistakes or limitations because that would shatter their grandiose self-image. Their pride leaves no room for humility or self-reflection, making them unteachable. They also have trouble forming genuine connections, since relating as an equal does not satisfy their need for dominance and recognition. The Stoics warn against the folly of arrogance. They advise cultivating humility and recognizing our human fallibility. Pride should come from living virtuously, not inflating our own importance. Interacting with arrogant individuals can be challenging. Their condescending attitude and refusal to listen to others can be irritating and frustrating. Stoicism advises remaining calm and objective in your interactions with arrogant individuals. Avoid getting drawn into arguments or trying to prove them wrong. Instead, focus on communicating your own ideas clearly and respectfully, without seeking their approval or validation. It's also important to remember that arrogance often stems from insecurity. The arrogant person may be trying to compensate for their own feelings of inadequacy by putting others down. By recognizing this, you can approach them with more compassion and understanding, without necessarily condoning their behavior. 8. Another problematic personality type discussed in Stoic teachings is the selfish individual. These people prioritize their own interests above all else and lack consideration for how their actions impact others. The selfish person tends to view everything in terms of, what's in it for me? Their main decision-making calculus is how they can personally benefit. They pursue their own agenda without weighing collateral effects on others, leading them to take advantage of people, ignore others' needs, break promises, and shirk duties that do not immediately serve them. They see no issue with benefiting at others' expense. Their excessive self-interest blinds them to their social obligations, creating a reputation for untrustworthiness and disloyalty. The selfish individual may achieve short-term gains but loses relationships and respect over the long run. Their cynicism and exploitation breed conflict and isolation. They fail to experience the fulfillment of mutual care and support. The Stoics caution that selfishness is ultimately a hollow path. We are social creatures meant to live in harmony, not conflict. Seeking to elevate others brings more meaning than elevating only oneself. Dealing with selfish individuals requires setting clear boundaries and enforcing consequences for their actions. Avoid allowing them to take advantage of you or exploit your generosity. It's also important to communicate your needs and expectations clearly, and to be prepared to walk away from relationships where your needs are consistently unmet. Remember, you cannot change the selfish person's behavior. Their self-centeredness is often deeply ingrained. Your role is to protect your own interests and well-being, and to cultivate relationships with people who are genuinely caring and supportive. 9th, another problematic personality type discussed in Stoic philosophy is the stubborn individual. These people adhere rigidly to their opinions and refuse to listen to reason or compromise. Their inflexibility makes them difficult to deal with. The stubborn person insists on having things their way no matter what. They are unable or unwilling to consider alternative perspectives, advice, or possibilities. Even clear evidence contradicting them will not sway their entrenched position. This breeds resistance to change and growth. The stubborn individual would rather persist in folly than adjust course and admit being mistaken. Adopting a more thoughtful approach would require opening their mind instead of clinging stubbornly to assumptions. Their rigid fixity also keeps the stubborn person from accommodating others' needs in relationships and collaborations. Everything becomes a power struggle rather than a mutual exchange. This tends to alienate people. Stoicism teaches the folly of stubborn rigidity. While principles are important, the wise retain flexibility in applying them with reason and care. We harm ourselves when we refuse to adapt to changing circumstances or listen to wisdom from others. Our goals should be truth and improvement, not clinging obstinately to fragile ego. When interacting with stubborn individuals, it's crucial to remain patient and respectful, even when you disagree with their views. Avoid engaging in confrontational arguments or trying to force them to change their minds. Instead, try to understand the reasons behind their stubbornness and find common ground where you can agree. Present your own perspective calmly and rationally, without being judgmental or dismissive. It's also important to recognize that you cannot always convince a stubborn person to see things your way. Sometimes, the best course of action is to agree to disagree and move on. Focus on maintaining a positive relationship and avoiding unnecessary conflict. 10th, the insensitive. These people lack empathy and care little about how their words and actions impact others. The insensitive person does not pick up on social cues or understand others' perspectives. They are tone-deaf to what might hurt, offend, or upset someone. They plow recklessly ahead with their agenda without regard for the effects. This insensitivity breeds hurt and resentment. The insensitive person leaves a wake of bruised feelings, anger, and people who feel devalued. Yet, the insensitive remain oblivious or indifferent to the harm caused. They do not reflect on how to conduct themselves with greater tact and care. Their harshness and lack of empathy tend to alienate people. Mean-spirited humor, blunt criticism, and callous disregard erode goodwill and trust. The insensitive person's relationships stay shallow because no one feels safe being vulnerable around them. Stoicism advocates developing greater empathy, compassion, and care in our conduct. While we cannot control how others receive us, we should aim to interact with kindness and consideration. Thoughtlessness yields discord and isolation, thoughtfulness yields understanding and community. When interacting with insensitive individuals, it's important to communicate your feelings clearly and directly, without being accusatory or aggressive. Let them know how their words or actions have affected you and what you would like them to do differently in the future. It's also important to recognize that insensitivity often stems from a lack of awareness, rather than intentional malice. The insensitive person may simply not realize the impact of their behavior. By providing them with feedback and guidance, you can help them to develop greater empathy and improve their social skills. However, it's also important to set boundaries and protect yourself from their insensitivity. If they are unwilling to change their behavior, it may be necessary to limit your exposure to them or to end the relationship altogether. 11th, another toxic personality type discussed in Stoic philosophy is the cynic. Cynical people dismiss sincerity, idealism, and goodness as gullible or foolish. Their reflexive skepticism poisons hope and erodes community. The cynic assumes the worst of people's motives and anything positive. They are scornful of virtues like honesty, compassion, and altruism, believing no one genuinely upholds such principles. The cynic's default is derision and distrust. This cynical posture stems from disappointment and protects their ego. If they reject virtue as real, the cynic avoids feeling naive for believing in goodness or let down when it fails. Yet, their skepticism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, pushing people away and degrading what they doubt. The cynic's caustic remarks and hair-triggered doubt tend to alienate others. Their derisive humor and refusal to believe the best corrode human connections. Beneath their protective scorn lies sadness about the good they feel cheated of. Stoicism teaches that while evil exists, we must retain faith in our collective potential for virtue and goodness. Cynicism is corrosive, it saps our power to improve society. Though disappointed, we must remain open to sincerity and work together to increase justice and compassion in the world. Interacting with cynical individuals can be frustrating and demoralizing. Their constant negativity and skepticism can wear you down and make it difficult to maintain a positive outlook. Stoicism advises avoiding getting drawn into their negativity or trying to convince them to change their minds. Instead, focus on maintaining your own values and beliefs, and on pursuing activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. It's also important to remember that cynicism often stems from deep-seated pain and disappointment. The cynic may have been hurt in the past and is now trying to protect themselves from further pain by rejecting all forms of idealism. By recognizing this, you can approach them with more compassion and understanding, without necessarily condoning their cynicism. 12. Another toxic personality type discussed in Stoic teachings is the manipulator. Manipulators exploit and deceive others for personal gain. Their duplicity makes them untrustworthy. The manipulative person treats interactions like chess games, strategizing advantage for themselves. They plot how to play people against each other, twist situations to their benefit, gain influence through false alliances, and coerce outcomes in their favor. This ruthless calculus makes the manipulator cunning but untrustworthy. They cultivate a facade of goodwill and sincerity, but it masks their self-serving agenda. The manipulator forms bonds superficially, dropping people once they lose usefulness. Their motives always override connection. This exploitative approach to relationships inevitably backfires. The manipulator may achieve some short-term victories through cunning schemes, but their deceitfulness and betrayal of confidences catch up with them. People come to see through the manipulator's false charade and refuse to be used any longer. The Stoics recognize that deceit and exploitation ultimately fail and isolate the perpetrator. Treating others with sincerity and respect, seeing them as fellow humans deserving of dignity, not pawns, is the only ethical and prudent way. Manipulation can never breed true cooperation. Dealing with manipulative individuals requires vigilance and assertiveness. Be aware of their tactics and avoid falling into their traps. Set clear boundaries and refuse to be pressured into doing things you don't want to do. Document all interactions and agreements in writing, to avoid being manipulated later. It's also important to trust your instincts. If something feels off or manipulative, it probably is. Don't be afraid to question their motives and challenge their behavior. If you suspect that you are being manipulated, distance yourself from the manipulator and seek support from trusted friends or family members. 13th, another problematic personality type discussed in Stoic teachings is the reckless individual. Reckless people take unnecessary risks and fail to consider the consequences of their actions. Their carelessness endangers themselves and others. The reckless person loves courting danger and pushing limits with little forethought. They get a thrill from taking foolish gambles, ignoring warning signs, and engaging in hazardous behavior without precautions. They seem to believe the rules don't fully apply to them. This recklessness breeds disaster down the line. The reckless person leaves a wake of crises that could have easily been avoided with prudence and self-control. Their lack of discipline impacts not just themselves but all those affected by their poor choices. Yet, even when their recklessness causes harm, the reckless individual fails to learn. They rationalize away mistakes, avoid accountability, and continue blindly indulging their whims. They fail to cultivate wisdom by reflecting on their errors. Stoicism stresses living rationally, not recklessly. While courage has its place, true bravery tempers boldness with reason to produce virtue, not hazard. Recklessness benefits no one in the end. We have duties to ourselves and others to show discipline, self-control, face consequences, and learn from mistakes. Interacting with reckless individuals can be stressful and anxiety-provoking. Their unpredictable behavior and disregard for safety can put you and others at risk. Stoicism advises avoiding situations where you might be exposed to their recklessness. If you must interact with them, set clear boundaries and refuse to participate in their risky activities. It's also important to communicate your concerns about their behavior and encourage them to seek help. However, you cannot force them to change. Ultimately, they must take responsibility for their own actions and make a conscious decision to live more responsibly. 14th, another problematic personality type discussed in Stoic philosophy is the unprincipled individual. These people lack integrity and moral standards. They will go to unethical lengths to get what they want. The unprincipled person does not feel bound by concepts of right and wrong. They are willing to lie, cheat, steal, betray, break promises, and harm others in pursuit of their ambitions. The end always justifies the means in their calculus. This creates an anything-goes mentality. The unprincipled person follows no inner sense of ethics or conscience. They have no trouble deceiving those who trust them or exploiting people's weaknesses for gain. Other people are just obstacles or tools. This unscrupulous approach inevitably backfires. The unprincipled person becomes untrustworthy and despised once their duplicity emerges. They leave a trail of disillusionment and lives damaged by their unethical actions. Any achievements they gain prove hollow. Stoicism stresses that pursuing virtue and noble purposes is the only path to true success. While worldly ambitions come and go, moral integrity endures. We must be willing to lose everything external before sacrificing inner principles. In the end, the unprincipled have nothing of lasting worth. Interacting with unprincipled individuals is highly risky. Their lack of integrity makes them untrustworthy and potentially dangerous. Stoicism advises avoiding any involvement with them whenever possible. If you must interact with them, be extremely cautious and protect yourself from their unethical behavior. Don't trust them with sensitive information or enter into agreements without carefully reviewing the terms. Document all interactions and agreements in writing, and seek legal advice if necessary. It's also important to report their unethical behavior to the appropriate authorities, if possible. By holding them accountable for their actions, you can help to protect others from being harmed. 15th, the final toxic personality type Stoicism warns about is the vicious individual. These malicious people take pleasure in cruelty, domination, and causing harm to others. Their callousness makes them profoundly dangerous. The vicious person sees compassion as weakness and derives satisfaction from inflicting pain. They are bullies who terrorize the vulnerable to assert power, or they subtly torment their targets mentally and emotionally. Their aggression covers deep sadism and insecurity. This active destructiveness poisons the vicious person's relationships and community. Their cruelty and exploitation of the weak breed fear and distrust. They leave trauma and despair in their wake. Their malice is an illness of the soul, contagious to all they contact. Stoicism stresses that as social beings, our fates are intertwined. Harming others ultimately harms ourselves. We must vigorously resist the lure of gratuitous cruelty, which destroys human dignity and bonds. True strength comes from uplifting others through empathy and care. The vicious pose a grave threat when in positions of power. Stoicism calls on us to renounce and check those who revel in causing harm. A healthy society allows no room for malice. Interacting with vicious individuals is extremely dangerous. Their cruelty and lack of empathy make them capable of inflicting serious harm. Stoicism advises avoiding any contact with them whatsoever. If you are in a situation where you cannot avoid them, protect yourself and others by seeking help from authorities or trusted individuals. It's also important to remember that vicious individuals often have deep-seated psychological problems. Their behavior is not a reflection of your worth or value. Do not blame yourself for their cruelty or try to change them. Focus on protecting yourself and seeking support from others. In essence, Stoicism offers a practical guide to navigating the complex landscape of human relationships. By recognizing these 15 distinct personality types, the flatterer, the greedy, the envious, the angry, the complainer, the self-pitying, the arrogant, the selfish, the stubborn, the insensitive, the cynical, the manipulative, the reckless, the unprincipled, and the vicious, we can better protect ourselves from their negative influences. The core principle is not to judge or condemn these individuals, but rather to understand their patterns of behavior and to strategically manage our interactions with them in order to safeguard our own well-being. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries, maintaining emotional detachment, and cultivating inner resilience. It reminds us that we cannot control the actions of others, but we can control our own reactions and choices. By focusing on our own virtue, wisdom, and inner peace, we can create a life that is less susceptible to the negativity of others. Remember, self-awareness is paramount. Consider whether you exhibit any of these traits yourself, and strive for continuous self-improvement. Through mindful self-reflection, we can not only protect ourselves from harmful relationships, but also cultivate a more virtuous and fulfilling existence. The ultimate goal is to live in accordance with Stoic principles, finding tranquility and purpose amidst the challenges of human interaction. This involves a continuous process of self-reflection, boundary setting, and a commitment to living a virtuous life. By embracing these principles, we can cultivate healthier relationships, protect our inner peace, and strive to become the best versions of ourselves.